You are now listening to Your Ideal Day with Adam Parker. Each week, we'll bring you an inspiring person or uplifting message on how to unlock your full potential. For more information, please visit youridealday.com. Your ideal, it's what you make it.
Welcome, this is the Ideal Day podcast. I'm your host, Adam Parker, and I'm so grateful for you guys tuning in with me today. So here on the Ideal Day podcast, I like to bring you guys the most relevant new information when it comes to all things that can help you have your ideal day. And obviously health is a big part of that. You hear the saying, health is wealth, right? So if you don't have your health, a lot of things you don't have access to. You don't have access to energy. You don't have access to really giving 110%. So I'm always looking at ways to make sure that I've got the best health possible for myself, my family, my community, and for you guys. And when I come across some new information that I think is relevant, I want to share it with you and hand it over to you so you can have a look at it and make what you want of it. So I recently came across a book that blew my mind, and it's all around the importance of minerals. Now, we've had previously Morley Robbins on the show. He talks a lot about minerals, including copper, magnesium, in his new book, Cure. So we'll put that episode in the show notes. Today's show is again focusing on minerals and the connection between minerals and health, but more specifically focusing on copper, the mineral that is copper. And this information you pretty much won't hear anywhere else. Jason's been on one or two other podcasts. The book is new. And again, it's really opened my eyes to information that I've never heard before. I think it's relevant and I think it's worth sharing. So today we're going to be talking all things copper, why it's super beneficial to health, and how if you start adding it into your routine, can see amazing shifts in your energy, your focus, so much. Personally, I have been supplementing copper now for probably, coming on 2 months, and I've seen some really big shifts in my sleep quality, my energy levels, how much strength I have. It's very interesting. And that's why I was inspired to reach out to Jason Hommel, who we have on the show today, and get him to share his story on copper, why he wrote the book, what's in the book. Because, wow, it's having an impact on me, and I think it's worth sharing. So before we jump into today's show, I want to thank our new listeners for joining us today. This is Adam Parker, and you're listening to the Ideal Day podcast. And of course, welcome back our long-time listeners. And I also want to thank you guys for subscribing, sharing this show, and leaving us a 5-star Apple podcast rating and review. We love that feedback. We love those comments. And we love beating that Apple algorithm. That blooming Apple algorithm, getting the message out there and getting people to tune in to the different stories and the different people that we bring on the show. So in today's show, we're learning all about the mineral that is copper and how it can have a really huge impact on your health, your energy, pretty much everything. And Jason is an expert in this field of copper and minerals, and just the information he lays out, which is all backed up by studies. He was very thorough within this book. It's study after study. And it's like he's uncovered a gold mine. It really is. It's like, wow, this information, why haven't we heard this before? So I think this episode is one you're really going to enjoy. And it's definitely an eye-opener to even what we hear in functional medicine and within, because that itself is an industry. We haven't heard this message yet. So I'm really excited to bring Jason Hommel on today and to share his story and his message around minerals and copper. So quick bio on Jason. Jason Hommel is the author of the book, The Copper Revolution, Healing with Minerals. And it's all about the safety and efficacy of supplementing the mineral copper. The studies he references in the book are eye-opening and a real paradigm shift. In 2020, Jason wrote the book Beyond the Arthritis Fix, Protocols for Strong Joints. The promotion for the book was put on hold as Jason immediately knew he had to write a book on copper. His research from that first book led him to discover that copper deficiency is involved in nearly every major disease that people die from. Jason spent 1 year devoting his time to uncovering information about copper, which he says is the most understood and slandered mineral. He poses the question in his book, what if copper is the exact opposite to what we've been told? So again, really interesting conversation with Jason. He's a great guy. I love his energy. I love his enthusiasm. And he really knows his stuff when it comes to this mineral. And I'm super excited to bring you this conversation today. So without further ado, this was my chat with Jason Hommel. Jason Hommel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. I'm glad to be here.
So, Jason, we were just chatting before we jumped on about how much I've enjoyed your new book, The Copper Revolution, Healing with Minerals. Now, I heard you on another podcast. It was a deep, very thorough podcast on copper. I was really inspired. I had to get you on. And I've really started looking at the importance of minerals in health because, you know, we hear, whether it's mainstream media or allopathic medicine or kind of alternative medicine, it's, you know, there's things like you got to eat well, you got to exercise, sleep. All of those things have a place, 100%. But I think there's not enough focus on minerals, and more importantly, what you're focusing on is copper. So I'm curious, what got you started on writing the book in the first place?
Well, that's a great question. What got me started writing on the book was I had just finished my first book, which was all about arthritis, because I have healed myself from arthritis over a good, 7 years. And as part of that process of healing from arthritis, minerals became an important part of it. So in writing the most thorough book that I could on arthritis, I had to cover copper. And what I found myself doing in that book was I realized that my chapter on copper was growing to like 27 pages. It was the largest chapter. And as I was doing more and more research, I really wanted to write the book on copper. It was just very compelling. And I realized that there are no copper advocates in the world, except for Morley Robson, who's been on your show. I don't think he advocates taking a lot of copper, not at the levels at which I found I needed to fix my own copper deficiency and heal from arthritis and make me feel good, and I have to say right off the bat, those levels are about 20 to 30 milligrams when I first started taking high levels of copper 4 years ago. And about 1 year ago, I learned to apply a topical copper sulfate to my entire body to get another 60 to 70 milligrams. So for a total of 100 milligrams daily. There's nobody in the world who advocates that amount of copper. Morley's more conservative in his approach, and I'm more radical. He recently compared himself on a podcast to the James Bond of copper, and I'm the Rambo of copper. So my approach is full on gusto, and I like that comparison. It's also like he's the cross-country skier, and I'm the downhill skier. So what really got me writing the book, though, was my realization that there's just not a lot of copper advocates out there. And I literally took time away from trying to publicize my first book, and I just delved right into writing the second book because of how important it was. And the real clincher, the real thing why I had to write the big book that got me so excited was the realization that copper deficiency plays a role in nearly every major disease that people die from in the United States, including heart disease and cancer, lung disease, liver disease, kidney disease, sepsis, infections, you name it, all in the top 10, copper plays a role. And that I found utterly shocking, like perhaps that copper has been the target for depletion. And some people have written that, and that maybe it's intentional. And I try to wrestle with that question in the book, and I found that it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we need to take copper for our own health. That's the only thing we can do. Trying to petition government to give us more copper is dumb and a huge waste of time because copper supplements are so cheap. Just go out and buy them, and that's what I advocate people do in my book.
Again, it's a fascinating read, and it's great to have you on because this concept of copper, I mean, of all the minerals like copper, why would copper be such a important mineral for health? But I know in the book you do talk about there's historical context, right? It's been used through many cultures. So could you give some examples of where copper's been used back in time from certain cultures on, as a healing kind of modality?
Well, I think one of the earliest cultures that we can find is the Israelites. They're a very ancient culture. It's in the Bible, the big brass laver that the priests would wash in before they would do their duties in the temple was made of copper. And in fact, it was a copper that was like a hand width thick at about, say, 6 feet deep and 15 feet wide, this big, long. And so copper has always had antiseptic properties. It kills germs on contact, so it would clean the water, so they would be ceremonially and ritually clean. One of the more interesting uses was malachite is a copper carbonate stone, and Cleopatra in ancient Egypt would use crushed malachite as eyeshadow and to keep herself looking beautiful and colorful at the same time, because copper is also a very powerful anti-inflammatory. In fact, my wife noticed the same thing when we started doing more copper with copper sulfate. She said, "Oh, my eyes look so much more youthful. The lines underneath, and just, wow, it's taken away some inflammation. This is great." Well, that's one of the things copper does. People also used copper for healing ulcers and open wounds, bleeding, or battle wounds. They would put either powdered copper sulfate or crushed malachite directly into the wounds. I wouldn't recommend using copper sulfate for that because copper sulfate stings like crazy. Maybe it would be better to use a solution. But I've only had nicks and cuts in the last 4 years. I haven't had big open wounds. I don't know. Maybe when things are deep, you don't have the pain sensation, and it's worth it just to stop the bleeding. That's another thing copper does. It stops bleeding. A lot of people these days, they look at coagulation as a bad thing because the medical establishment seems to teach that. But there are numerous clotting factors. And one of the clotting factors that's bad is clotting factor 8, which causes internal blood clots. And copper lowers clotting factor 8 and increases other clotting factors that prevent internal blood clots. It rather only clots the blood when it bleeds. So that's really interesting. Copper also raises red blood cell counts. And with a higher red blood cell count, the platelets, the blood cells will stick together better because there's enough of them. In anemia, one of the problems of anemia is increased bleeding. So that's interesting. Another big thing that copper does is, as I said, it kills all germs on contact. It increases our immune system, gives us more white blood cells. None of the other minerals are known for increasing white blood cell counts. Not even iron or iodine will do that. Another thing that copper does is that it increases collagen synthesis. And it's very difficult to figure out how important collagen is, but I thought that our bones were mostly calcium until I looked it up, and I found that 35% of our bones is actually collagen. We need the collagen matrix, then the calcium gets put into. And in fact, our muscles are 30% collagen. Collagen supplements are all the rage these days, but you really don't need to supplement collagen because if you eat collagen, that doesn't necessarily allow your body to synthesize and make collagen. We need copper to make it. In fact, we need quite a few things. We need copper, vitamin C, zinc, and selenium to synthesize collagen. But usually the one that's the lowest is copper. So when we get just a little bit more copper, our collagen formation is better, and we have a more youthful appearance. I should probably get close to the camera so you can see I am 51.
You're looking great, Jason.
Thank you. It's part of the copper. My wife and I were like, we're on an upward spiral of health. This is great. So that's probably concludes most of the things that copper does. And I would also have to say it heals and prevents all the major things that people die from. And then also, I think it's a viable substitute for nearly all of the top 50 medications being prescribed in the United States, with the exception of potassium, because we need potassium on its own as a separate mineral.
It literally sounds like a wonder drug, right? I mean, it does everything apart from it can't replace potassium, as you said. So eat more bananas and get it for other means. So is it the fact that copper's decreased within our food? Like, why now is there not enough copper? Because I'm guessing way back when there was enough. So what's caused this decrease?
There's about 3 or 4 big questions you asked there. I'll try to tackle them one by one. But historically, let's say 50 to 100 years ago, when the food supply was different and when the soils weren't so depleted with artificial fertilizer and glyphosate, which is a chelator, which removes copper from the soil and makes it less bioavailable. In fact, that might be why glyphosate, part of the way it does its dirty work, is it makes copper biounavailable for plants. When we're eating depleted foods, we're going to get less copper. And then also historically, our ancestors seem to know to eat liver on a regular basis, and we don't. And liver has more copper in it by a factor of 60 times more than just about any other food. So a pound of liver will give you 64 milligrams of copper. And in that context, me supplementing with 30 milligrams of copper is not a lot. It's like the equivalent of a half pound of liver a day. But these days, our generation, we don't really eat liver on a regular basis. Maybe once a year or less is how much I eat liver, because it's a disgusting food. And so I've just learned to supplement copper rather than to have to eat liver. But you can't even go out and find liver on menus if you go out to eat any day these days. It's not in the consciousness anymore. We've sort of forgotten about it. That's just so many reasons, so many answers. We live in a society, I don't know what it's like in England, but all white breads are fortified with iron in America. Is it like that there too?
Yes, I think the iron fortification program was the US, the UK, I think Australia and Canada. So all the big Western speaking. So yeah, it's here. Iron fortified is here. Yeah.
So iron blocks copper. So that's another reason why we're going to end up lower copper than our ancestors, because we're getting less and we tend to block it more. Also, vitamin C supplements and zinc supplements are more and more popular, and vitamin C blocks copper and zinc blocks copper. In fact, it's a really interesting way that we know how zinc blocks copper is because zinc and selenium and copper all work together to make one of these copper-containing enzymes called metallothionein. And this particular one has an affinity for depleting copper. So when we take zinc and our bodies make more metallothionein, then we deplete the copper. But this is a good enzyme too. It's not all bad because it also depletes and chelates a lot of the heavy metals. So a couple of people in my group are getting benefits from taking zinc and copper and selenium, and they're detoxing things like mercury, and they're feeling better than they have in a long time. So that's very exciting to see, because I've never before, my book, seen anybody advocate taking copper and zinc to try to eliminate mercury. There is a selenium mercury detox group on Facebook, but nobody ever talks about how copper and zinc through metallothionein could do that. And so maybe we've hit upon something exciting here.
So I know when we talk about minerals, there are different antagonists, right? So you're saying if we have high iron, we have low copper, and it's like that for all the different types of minerals. But I get what you're saying, that just the environment that we're now living in, it just makes it so much more harder to get not just more copper, just a general balanced amount of minerals in, for the diet. Even if you buy organic food, it's got the organic tick, but how good is the soil that it was farmed in or grew in? We don't know. You're right. People don't eat beef liver really nowadays. In the UK, you used to have things like steak and kidney pies, right? So it was a way of getting organs into the diet. Those things aren't really popular anymore. It's all about fast food, and which is full of seed oils, etc. So so much has changed. And yeah, I can see why we lack copper and also just lack minerals in general.
Yeah, and I think I fortunately stumbled into my own copper deficiency by trying to be healthy. So I put myself on the high iodine protocol just for general health, and I discovered that iodine depletes copper a little bit. I also tested low zinc, and so I was taking zinc, and zinc was wonderful for me. And I didn't quite realize when I first started taking zinc and copper that zinc was lowering copper. It took me a while to figure that one out. I also took MSM sulfur as a supplement because it's safer than DMSO sulfur, apparently, and sulfur can block copper. Boron has a sort of a positive and negative relationship to copper. It can probably both assist in copper at lower levels, but then at higher levels, it can maybe block it a little bit. And again, I also often took vitamin C and maybe excessive amounts of zinc, and those are the two biggest that deplete copper. So in trying to take care of my own health and taking lots of supplements, I inadvertently was depleting my own copper. And then I went through an experiment because copper was making me nauseated in my stomach. I could tell it was just the copper. And so I said, well, I'm just going to test out and see if I can get away with not taking copper. This was before I did a lot of research into it. And I kind of had discovered that copper had stopped my nosebleeds because copper stops bleeding. And that was really nice because I didn't have a nosebleed in over a year. And I said, well, I can easily experiment then because I've got this superpower detector, nosebleeds. If the nosebleeds come back, I'll know I'll need copper. Well, I didn't take copper for about 6 to 8 months. And I fell into a bit of a mental funk, which also was what copper deficiency does, because we need copper for the nerves, as I then later researched when I got back on it. And so when I got back on copper, I realized that I liked it so much that maybe I wanted to take more than 10 milligrams. And in having to research the safety of copper, I wanted to know whether I could take more than 10 milligrams. I decided to research, well, why is the limit at 10? Why did the government establish that limit? They established that limit because that limit creates no liver damage. And I was not satisfied with that answer because I was a former alcoholic and a former user of pain pills, which I've sworn off of both of those things several years ago when I was discovering this. I said, well, I want to know what is the level of copper that will create some liver damage. And in asking that one question, I realized they don't know yet, and that they promised to do further studies 29 years ago in 1993, and they've never done any study since. So we really don't know the level at which will cause some liver damage. And one guy, Olivares, he did a study of 800 people taking up to 20 milligrams of copper, and he tested for liver damage and signs of liver damage on all of them, and nobody ever had any liver damage. So if it's safe for him, what's the level at which liver damage takes place? And it's usually 20,000 milligrams of copper sulfate. That indicates copper is super, super safe. So why in the world are they limiting it to 10? That makes no sense. So that's why I began experimenting with more and enjoying the benefits of more. After enjoying the benefits and writing my first book and then realizing copper is far more important, then I wrote the second book.
So you talked about loads of benefits started to occur, right? So, you went off the copper, went back on, the nosebleed stopped. You're like, okay, that's interesting. But now you've gone to a place where you've gone from 30 milligrams up to, I think you said 100. What are the health benefits, the improvements that you've seen in your health? And obviously your wife is also a high dosing copper. What things have changed and transformed for the better with you guys?
That's a great question. So at 30 milligrams, I was feeling very healthy, except for the nausea factor, because copper will make a little bit of a nausea, and I didn't like that. But so then the question is, well, can I take more? And when I discovered copper sulfate, it was really at first, because it was all in the literature, it's the most common one mentioned. And it's the one mentioned at these super high safe and super high dangerous levels, which implies that it's safe. And then when I realized how cheap it was, that you can get like a 10-pound bag of it, I started making it that way. And it was for 3 cents, you can make an amount that will last you a month. That enabled me to take a lot more without having to feel like I was spending $100 a month on just copper alone. Because a little copper glycinate bottle of pills is just not going to get you there. Those will cost you $10 each, and you're going to go through those bottles really fast. So I first had to find a cheap supply of it before I could really increase the dose. And one of the first things I noticed when I began applying topical copper, so I had already written the book on how to heal from arthritis. So when you heal from arthritis and you're feeling better, when I first started healing before even doing any of the minerals, I said from my own perception, I feel 90% better. However, each time I added a layer, different mineral, I added like a layer of strength. And it was like that with copper too. I was at 30 milligrams. I'm like, my joints feel better than ever. Well, I'm just going to go finally apply copper topically because I could afford to do so. And I figured out how to do so. And wow, the improvement in my joints a year ago when I started doing that was fantastic. So I like to run. I like to sprint because it burns fat great. But I'm a 220-pound, 6'1" man. So when I sprint, my feet get pounded into the ground. And I have flat feet from probably a lifetime of copper deficiency, quite frankly. They won't even take you into the army. So, and I've had foot problems before, and I've had to wear orthotics. So when I began sprinting, and I noticed significantly less foot pain just from applying copper topically over my whole body, that was a huge, huge benefit. And in continuing to weight lift, because I try to keep myself in shape, I noticed that a lot of the icks and cricks in my joints that were almost gone still had huge room for improvement and all got significantly better. I am still getting better now. I feel now I have nothing at all. It's only nothing compared to where I was a year ago. I mean, I'm still improving, and it's incredible. Another good thing is that, so copper is used to make coloring in our hair, prevents gray hair. So a lot of my gray hair faded as I started adding more copper. A couple of years ago, when I got a haircut, it was more than half gray on the floor. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting old. And now when I get a haircut, it's like a 10% gray on the floor. If you look at the top of my head, not.
Did you apply it to your hair?
I do. It doesn't really get through the hair that well. So it's really by applying it to the skin and getting it into the blood system, it then puts it everywhere. into the hair. So that was cool. And then I had like a sun damage patch on my arm that was almost as big as a dime, a white spot on my skin. I chalked it up to sun damage, or it could have also been from copper deficiency induced by the high iodine protocol. And, this age spots, what are you going to do? You're getting older, right? And for 3 years, I'm on this high copper. It should be fixing it. Copper's used to make melanin in the skin. I don't know why it's doing it. I feel like a fraud. You're reading it. Just because you read somebody else say that it does, it doesn't mean it actually will. Clearly, it's not. But, woe is me. Whatever. I'm vain. I shouldn't even be thinking about it. I should have taken a picture. Because in the last year, in writing the book, I became more confident. And instead of applying copper to my skin once a week and going conservative, because, there is a theoretical risk, right? I'm the only one taking all this much. Well, in writing the book, I applied copper more like 5 times a week instead of 1 time a week. And sure enough, the white patch on my arm is filling in. So there's just a little bit there left, but it's not nearly as big as it was. And so things like that, though, that's cool. And my wife, she's experienced so many things. The biggest is probably the bleeding. She is comfortable with me talking. I have her permission. She had long, heavy bleeding periods, and they're now down to 3 days with very little bleeding. Also, just a better feeling in her joints as well. I mean, not all the things have gone away, but she's working 12 hours on her feet, and it's amazing she's able to keep up with the kids. So that's good. That's about the gist of it. A lot of things you can't quite see or I don't test for, but when I used to sprint, my heart would pound out of my chest, right? And now there's like no pain in my heart. I never have pain in my heart from weightlifting. One of the things, copper is supposed to be super great for heart disease. So I feel like that's great because guys my age in their 50s, heart attacks are a risk. So some things are real subtle that you can't quite brag about, but I feel it's working for me.
Yeah. And I think with any health journey, right, you're saying that you've been doing this for a year and you're slowly seeing things change. And that's the thing. Things don't happen overnight. Everything's a process. Healing is a process. Disease is a process. So I wonder, where will you be 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line? Because it's this progressive continuation goes in that direction.
That's right. So it takes about 7 years to replace all the cells in our body. So yeah, I'm happy to look forward to all sorts of other things healing. I don't expect the arches of my feet to come back to normal, but if I don't have any foot pain there, that's, what should I complain about?
So sounds like copper is something that we need to look at. And you talk about lack of copper causes disease and a lot of diseases. So what are the main diseases that we face as a culture? I include the US, the UK, like that kind of Western culture. What main diseases could you say that is a result of a copper deficiency?
There are so many. Again, all the major diseases that people die from have a component of copper deficiency. And I did not expect that. 2 that I really didn't expect were liver and kidney problems, because when people take 20,000 milligrams of copper, the problems that they experience are liver and kidney problems. And the government warned that over 10 milligrams could cause liver problems. So that's something to be aware of in future studies that they never conducted. So I was thinking, well, clearly copper is going to be relatively bad for the liver. It's not going to be good for it. But my research to really get into that question showed the exact opposite, that it's a copper deficiency is more associated with liver damage, and we need enough copper to even heal the liver. And in fact, copper concentrates in the liver, which is kind of goes to show that it's good for the liver because the liver wants it. And a lot of the copper containing enzymes are made in the liver. So 90% of liver problems are cirrhosis from hepatitis C or from alcohol or fatty liver disease. Copper works and cures all 3 of those. Copper is antiviral. Alcohol blocks copper, but copper is healing. That if you take enough copper, it can help heal the damage caused by the alcohol. And as for fatty liver disease, copper is helpful in metabolizing fats. So my wife actually was diagnosed with fatty liver disease, but about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, she went in for a liver test and her liver test came back fully normal. So apparently copper also healed her liver. Again, one of those things I had overlooked. So the main things to watch out for with copper deficiency are, so many. Peripheral neuropathy, like a tingling and numbness in your hands or feet, which is often associated with diabetes. And copper is also great for diabetes because copper helps us resensitize ourselves to insulin. So by taking copper, you can actually begin to lower the blood sugar. And in fact, my friend who came out to visit me, I was encouraging him to take copper. One morning, he said he just felt awful. He said he felt awful. And I'm like, well, what do you need? What's going on? Do you need food or something? And food made him feel better instantly. And we realized that it was because copper was healing him a little bit, lowering his blood sugar in his fasted morning pre-breakfast state. We just had to get food in him right away. And sure enough, he got it right away because the copper's resensitizing us to insulin. And when insulin then is actually working, that's what insulin does. It lowers your blood sugar. So paradoxically, he felt worse, but he was actually healthier. So copper cures the diabetes, it cures the peripheral neuropathy, and it cures ulcers, all associated with diabetes. It's amazing. Other one is mental sluggishness. So a lot of people, they say they have a mental speed up when they take copper. In my forum, the two biggest things that people mention are more energy from taking copper and better sleep. People who aren't taking copper, your question was, well, what are people noticing in deficiency? So that would be fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome, no energy, poor wound healing, and not sleeping well. And not sleeping well is there's more to not sleeping well than just that. What happens in copper deficiency is we also have histamine reactions and allergic reactions. So people's nose clog up. So a clogged up nose where you can't breathe through your nose. Here, I'll show you, right? My mouth will be closed for a second. Breathing just through my nose, okay? So at nighttime, I've gotten so used to breathing through my nose all the time with clear nostrils on both sides, it's almost unusual because the bulk of my life was not that way. And in fact, I was just thinking last night, I said, every single time I do bodybuilding, I bring my weight up, it seems as if I get congested in my body and I can no longer breathe through my nose and it feels like I'm getting sick, but not with enough copper and zinc. That does not happen because it keeps my nose clean. So some of the people on the forum, they're saying, I'm sleeping better because my nasal passage is totally clear, because they're not having excessive histamine. They're not having inflammation because toxins are getting removed. It's all related.
What's really interesting is, well, firstly, this information, I'm surprised it's just not more widespread, more in the public domain. It's just not there. And you think about what are the narratives in culture? It's you've got low iron, so you need to take an iron pill. Going through your book, there's so much evidence there. It's insane. It's like this study after reference study. So I just wonder why are we in this position where, you're flying the flag of copper and Morley's there as well. Why isn't it discussed in allopathic medicine or even alternative medicine? It's not really a narrative, as it were.
That's a very good question. Some people have speculated that Western medicine got fully corrupted around the year 1913 with this report in the United States called the Flexner Report, whereby Rockefeller decided to put all other medical practitioners out of business and only fund the drug and cutting professions and banded them into one. So Western medicine is not a curative-based medicine form, but it's a profit-based medicine form because drug manufacturing and patents on drugs is profitable and because surgical options are profitable. So if a surgeon goes in and inserts a balloon into your chest to try to inflate one of the blood vessels that's collapsing in your heart, that's a $50,000 procedure. But if you learn to take copper entirely on your own, and you can take massive doses of copper that will get you healed for 3 cents, nobody can profit off of that. So most businesses aren't set up to teach you how to avoid using their services. That would be a financial conflict of interest, and we would not expect to ever see that happen. It's a very hard wake-up call, I think, for people to hear or realize that, but it's like that for all of the other very vital minerals, too. They all have a very similar history. Boron was banned in Australia, for example, because it was healing people's arthritis. Iodine fell out of favor in 1945 because it could theoretically harm the thyroid. But that's not even proven. Not proven to this day, but iodine has fallen out of favor because they want to use prescription antibiotics. And if we all had a very cheap antibiotic available like iodine and even copper, would we ever need their antibiotics? So they just don't fit the profit-based Western medicine, even though there's science behind them. People will, keep doing the studies and stumble on the truth, but when they realize there's no money behind it, I think it's also very hard for things to get out there. We need truth tellers and we need the internet, even for me to be able to discover these things about copper, because without the internet, how would I even have found them? And we need guys like you telling the truth to be able to get the message out there. I think this is one of those messages, however, that has a really good chance to go viral, because the benefits, once you start taking copper, the people in my forum are like, this is life-changing. This is a game changer. So many of my health problems are melting away. I went out and cleaned the car today. I had the energy to do crazy things, and I did it, and I felt great. People are writing crazy testimonials like, I feel like I'm feeling joy for no reason for the very first time in my life. These are amazing testimonials because, as I've written in my book in chapter 1, copper heals the nerves in about 15 different ways. It boosts neurotransmitters. It acts like a neurotransmitter, helps us reuptake the neurotransmitters so that they can be used again. It restores the myelin sheath, which is the fatty coating around the nerves, which creates the insulation that allows for faster nerve conduction, say, down the length of your leg and back, so that you have better coordination so that you can ride a bike. And you have myelination happening rather than demyelination and degeneration. Not only are you staving off Alzheimer's, but the brain comes back. So I am now more verbal and smarter, I feel, than I was in my 40s. But could be due because, I'm no longer an alcoholic. But, everything builds on itself. When you start doing things that are good for your health, you get on a positive roller coaster, or I like to say an upward spiral of health. It's nice.
Another thing that's kind of talked about is copper toxicity. And I always find that confusing. I think I have things like vitamin A toxicity or copper toxicity, and I'm thinking, okay, is it true? You can go online and Google anything and they'll be like, oh, you'll have symptoms of this, that, and the other, and they're very generic based symptoms. You mentioned earlier that there's a couple of studies, but is copper toxicity, is it real? Is it something that we would ever be concerned about? Obviously, we start doing high dose copper. Is it something that someone should be concerned about? Because it sounds like there's so much upside with copper, but is there too much? So yeah, this copper toxicity piece, is it a narrative created by, beginning with a Flexner report and it's all big pharma based, or is there relevance to it?
So I have looked very diligently into the evidences for copper toxicity by researching anyone who has anything has to say about copper toxicity. And I go into all their studies, and a lot of times they're misquoting studies, or they are misconstruing what the studies concluded. And I'll get into some specifics there. I want to blow away the idea in just a quick, short second or two. And it goes like this. How much copper do you need to take over what period of time? And I'm asking milligrams, and I'm asking for months. How many milligrams over how many months will create copper toxicity? It's a great question because none of those people have an answer to that, because their ideas are not based on a study that shows that. In fact, the studies show the opposite. Olivares, who I quoted to you earlier, he studied up to 20 milligrams of copper for a month or two and showed no liver disease in 800 participants. So if there was a copper toxicity, surely Olivares would have found it, but he hasn't. So the idea behind it is loosely based on government propaganda and misquoted studies. And I want to go over a couple of those with you. One of them, they gave, I think it was the equivalent of 0.12 milligrams for humans to rats, and they fed them a ton of cholesterol. And they say, look, these rats develop brain damage. So therefore, copper causes brain damage. Well, no, they also gave them a ton of cholesterol. And they also, that much cholesterol blocks copper. And the amount of copper that they gave at 0.12 milligram equivalent, we only get 0.6 milligrams. So they fed them copper deficient diets and they blocked the copper. So they didn't prove that copper caused brain damage. They proved that copper deficiency caused brain damage. They misquoted their own study. And then there's another study where they gave people, this was actually in people, 3 milligrams of copper, and they fed them high trans fat diets. And the group of people with high trans fat diets developed Alzheimer's at a rate higher than people fed trans fats with no copper. So then they said, well, then therefore it must be the copper. However, again, we already know that trans fats cause degeneration. That's not in dispute. But why did copper make it worse? Well, you're already adding something bad into the mix. And what did I tell you earlier? Copper helps make the myelin sheath. But if your diet is high in bad fats, then the body will use the bad fat that's available plus the copper to incorporate and remake the myelin sheath. So the toxic fats are being put right into the nerves. So we realized that, well, to do this high copper thing, that means no fried food. That means not just no margarine, but no fried foods. And we got to be a little bit more careful with our diet. Maybe even we need to take some coconut oil too, because that's one of the good fats that's, if coconut oil gets put into the brain, that actually reverses Alzheimer's. So we've begun trying to incorporate coconut oil into our diet and things like that. So again, there's little evidences here and there for copper toxicity, but it's always from misquoted studies. And there's another one they like to quote, and it is children in India who are so impoverished that their mothers boil the milk that they feed their kids in copper pots develop liver problems. So that indicates that maybe copper is toxic. Great, maybe. However, the kids are A, impoverished because they're in India, and B, why are the mothers boiling the milk? Because why? Maybe it's boiled milk and full of bacteria. So maybe all the dead bacteria are causing the problem. Or maybe it's a poverty-based diet that's causing the problem, not so much copper. And in fact, if you look at how much copper will leach off of a pot into their diets, it's less than, it's like, 1.5 milligrams. It's not enough to be able to blame copper because it's not a high copper diet.
That's true. And you said about in Ayurveda, they use copper kind of cylinders to drink out of. They leave the copper overnight, right? And that's seen as a health practice.
Yeah, and so in Ayurveda, if you do that overnight, it only adds about 0.4 milligrams of copper to the diet. It's not a lot, but it can be effective if your diet only has half a milligram, because that's almost 100% increase.
Okay, so I think it's very clear that there's definitely benefits to increasing copper in the diet. So you talked about how do we get it naturally? Well, there's beef liver, which is great. Knowing Morley's work, I know he also is an advocate for beef liver, bee pollen, and some other bits. You've gone down the copper sulfate route. So just explain how you would, I know you do it topically, and I'm sure you consume some of it. So what would you do? Is this something you can buy, or do you make it? How do you create this copper sulfate to then start applying?
So what's really awesome about copper sulfate pentahydrate, which means 5 waters, it's a blue crystal that's used by industry for like killing roots, for cleaning pools. So you can get a very, very pure form of it. It's like typically it's 99% pure. And you buy a bag of it for a 1 pound bag for like $5 or a 10-pound bag for about $30 or $40. And what you do is you take 5/8 of a teaspoon of copper sulfate and you pour it into a 2-ounce bottle of water. You can just add water and you can shake it, let it settle, and overnight it will dissolve. Or you could add boiling water and you could get it dissolved right away, and then you still got to let it cool down for a little bit. But either way, that will make a 1 milligram per drop solution. It costs about 3 cents. And that bottle contains about 1,182 drops. And so you're getting 1,182 milligrams of copper in that bottle. And you can use, what we do is we put 10 drops in our first coffee in the morning, and another 10 drops. And then we apply it to our skin, and maybe one other drink throughout the day, like milk at night. And that's how we do it.
And when you apply it either in your coffee or on your skin, is there a boost of energy, or is it just these health benefits you just see as you go about your day?
Most people, when they start, they notice a boost of energy within the first day or two. I had intended to apply copper to my skin before our interview, but I got busy online and I didn't get to it. But I feel like my energy levels are really high. Today's my day off. I lifted yesterday. I don't lift so much that I get sore. I have plenty of energy. I spoke about this with my wife, and we are noticing that as we apply copper or not, it seems to have less of an effect, because I think we're hitting more of a saturation effect. Like I said, we've been doing the topical copper with copper sulfate for about 1 year, but we have been on high copper at 30 milligrams for about 4 years. So the first 3 years, we were doing it strictly with the copper glycinate, typical supplements that you buy at the grocery store. And the trouble is, we'd clean them out and we'd have to order one. And we'd go through them so quickly, I would go, oh no, now we have to start rationing until we can get more. Oh, I'll go to the store. They're still cleaned out. They didn't order more. Oh, now we have to wait for Amazon to deliver more, more bottles. Oh man, we just spent another $40 on copper and it hasn't even been 20 days. Oh, what am I doing? So the consistency and the amounts got better when I figured out how to make a little bottle that lasts a whole month for 3 cents.
Yeah, I mean, that is insane cost effective, from $60 to 3 cents.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
yes.
For sure. And you talk about minerals have these ratios and antagonists, etc. You mentioned earlier about when you take copper, you take zinc as well. But then you also mentioned that zinc blocks copper. So I'm curious about that. Is that something that you take copper, but you also take zinc? And do you take them at the same time because they block each other? So keen for you to unpack that.
That's a very good question. So since I wrote my book, and it's not very much in my book, you haven't read the whole thing yet, it's in there, but not to the level at which I've learned now through the forum. And what I found out was this. Again, because zinc blocks copper, I had to experiment with lowering zinc. And when I got down to about 10 milligrams of zinc with my 100 milligrams of copper, diarrhea set in. And I had that for about 5 days. In further researching, found out that zinc deficiency can lead to diarrhea. When I increased the zinc back up, quite a few things happened. First of all, the diarrhea stopped, and I had increased libido. And one of the persons on the forum, when they started taking a lot of copper, they said, well, that didn't take long. My libido tanked. And so I realized, well, if his libido tanked on low zinc and my libido tanked on low zinc, then we have a problem. Since we're taking such large amounts of copper, we have to take enough zinc to go along with it. So 10 milligrams was not enough, but 20 to 30 seemed about right. My libido came back, the diarrhea went away. A couple other things. When you're low in zinc, you'll have more insomnia at night. You might have more bleeding, like on the hands. Little cuts will show up. I don't exactly know why, whether it was accidental or whatnot, but zinc is also very important for wound healing and raising testosterone. So maybe these little wounds will appear with less abrasions, will more likely cause wounds if you're low on zinc. So we just sort of figured that out in the first month that we had to go back up. I tested lower zinc because it blocks copper. But again, you need a sufficient amount to fix everything. So right now I'm on like about 30 milligrams of copper, 30 milligrams of zinc, plus 70 milligrams of topical, and it seems about right. There's a little bit more to that too. What I found is that in trying to give advice, it's very difficult because everybody has a different situation. And so vegans it's hard for vegans to even get 1 milligram of zinc, whereas people on carnivore only diet can get up to 30 milligrams of zinc. So it depends on how much meat and how much vegetables you're getting also will have an effect on how much you need to supplement your zinc levels. Now, again, as for me and what I'm doing, it's important to know I'm a 220-pound man. I'm 6'1", and I have a relatively high meat diet. I'm not fully carnivore, but there you go.
So what I was going to say is, okay, so zinc's important. As you go along your journey, you've increased this copper, you realize zinc plays a role. What type of zinc do you take? So there's all different forms of these minerals. So what type of zinc? And then when would you take the zinc in relation to when you're taking copper? Because obviously they can block each other.
So I've taken numerous kinds of zinc and brands, and I have not found that any of them make a difference, whether I'm eating a zinc gummy for 10 milligrams and taking 3 of them to get to 30, or whether I'm cutting a 50 milligram tablet. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't seem to matter if I take a zinc sulfate or a zinc picolinate or a zinc chelate. It doesn't really matter too much. They all have a very similar effect. When you're buying supplements that are just one mineral, you're far less likely to get a fraudulent package or product than when you buy 5 minerals in one. Or, so a lot of these supplements, they're adulterated, especially if you buy like a male enhancement product that's supposed to be herbal and vitamin and steroid precursors. 30% of the time, the FDA has found that those particular products are spiked with steroids. And you don't really want to mess with steroids because they ultimately will tank your own natural production of hormones. So again, most of the stuff on the shelf is safe. If I really took the time, maybe I could figure out and source some zinc sulfate and buy that in bulk too. But I just haven't done that because, again, zinc is so much cheaper than copper. And they give you so much. They give you like 50 milligram pills for $10. That lasts me half a year. So the cost is not an incentive to try to go and find out something cheaper than that.
And so did you say what time of day or when particularly you take zinc?
Right. So we generally take zinc at night because zinc also is a great sleep aid in several ways. It does help deeper sleep, and then also it acts as a decongestant, and it's a stronger antihistamine than copper is. So it just helps sleep at night. And also our bodies make testosterone at night. We heal a lot at night. Zinc is known for healing, making testosterone. And testosterone doesn't just build muscles. Testosterone builds muscles through the healing factor. It's a healing factor. So when bodybuilders tear themselves down, they're really tearing themselves down in the gym. They build their muscles when they're sleeping in bed at night. It's the sleep that builds it up, and the zinc and the testosterone as a healing factor, not so much the gym.
So for anyone that's listened to today's show and they're thinking, do you know what, that sounds interesting, where should they start? Should they go straight to copper sulfate? Should they just buy some copper from the store? Like if they're curious, they think, okay, this sounds interesting. Where would you recommend they start?
It's actually cheaper to buy a 1 pound bag of copper sulfate for $5 than it is to buy a $10 bottle of copper glycinate that has, maybe only 60 pills in it at 3 milligrams each for, what is that? A total 60 times 3, 90 milligrams. Why spend $10 for 90 milligrams when you can have a huge, literally 10 to 20 year supply of copper at high levels? You might as well. So buy yourself a 1 pound bag of copper sulfate, buy a 2 ounce dropper bottle, and measure out 5 1/8 teaspoonfuls into that 2 ounce bottle, and just add water. And that makes a roughly 1 milligram per drop solution, and start taking it by the drop, single drop at a time, slowly work your way up. Avoid nausea. You really don't want to make yourself sick. People in the beginning, if they start with 3 milligrams, you got to understand the background diet is 0.6 milligrams. But when you jump all the way to 3 milligrams, you're increasing it by a factor of 600%. And that's probably another reason why people think copper is toxic. If people are vomiting and throwing up on it, and half the people have nausea when they start at 3. So start at 1, slowly increase, take it with milk. People in my forum have discovered if you put it in milk, much less nausea, not a problem. People are going up to, 5, 6, 7, 8 milligrams at once that way, 3 times a day. All of a sudden, you have enough copper to do significant healing wonders.
I think this is great. I think the book is fantastic. I feel like we've kind of scratched the surface today. I think there's a lot more we could delve into, but I wanted to get this concept out to our listeners because, again, I think it's important. I think a lot of the listeners are looking to continue to improve in all areas, and health is one of them. And I was so intrigued by this book because I'd never heard this sort of information. I was like, wow. So it's great to get you on. Where can listeners find out more about you and connect with you?
There's really there's 3 ways. There's my book, The Copper Revolution. It's sold exclusively on Amazon right now. There's my website, which is called revealingfraud.com, spelled just like it sounds, revealingfraud.com. And then I have a Facebook group of about 600 people, almost 700 people in it. And we're talking back and forth and learning more information about how to do it right and how to do it best, and sharing more information. And that Facebook group has the same name. It's The Copper Revolution, Healing with Minerals.
Brilliant. Amazing. So we'll put all of that in the show notes for the listeners so they can check that out. So final question from me, Jason. What 3 pieces of advice would you give our listeners to help them achieve their ideal day?
To have an ideal day, of course, start with copper in the coffee in the morning, and maybe even add some iodine too. So that's 2 things. And then the third, it didn't take me too while to get this one, and that is always not just tell the truth, but seek the truth. Because the truth is often slandered and buried, and there's no one there to advocate it. I like to say, I was in another industry before. It was a commodity industry as well. Copper is a commodity, and it has no voice. It can't speak for itself, so we have to speak for it. So speak up, speak the truth, seek the truth, find the truth, learn the truth, tell the truth. It's a big process.
3 solid points to finish off. Jason, it's been great. Really enjoyed the conversation. We'll have you back on for round 2 because I think we just scratched the surface, really. But thanks again.
Thank you, Adam. I really enjoyed the interview. Thank you so much.
And for more after the show, make sure you head over to youridealday.com where you can find out more information. Please support the show by heading to Apple Podcasts to leave a review and to let everybody know that the show is awesome. Or you can take a screen grab, post it on your Instagram stories, or just tell a friend about the podcast to get the word out there. I'd appreciate that so much. Take care, and thanks for tuning in.